think it would be very difficult to imagine it being just restricted to Taiwan and its region. I think you would see a horizontal escalation throughout Southeast Asia, into Japan, into other countries, very quickly, within weeks or months of some kind of war over Taiwan.
This is a conversation with General Mick Ryan. Mick is a former high commanding officer in the Australian Army, and today he works mostly on the topic of the future of war. He wrote 2 excellent books, War Transformed, in which he explains how will technology shape future conflicts, and The White Sun War, a fictional account of a war over Taiwan, in which he brings these ideas to life and shows how devastating a future superpower conflict would be. In this conversation, we talk about all that and much more. Thank you to my supporters on Patreon who helped me make this happen, and consider becoming one of them if you're enjoying this podcast. And now, enjoy the conversation. All right, well, so welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
You wrote 2, I think, hugely important books. One more on the theory of the future of war and how technology is changing what wars will be fought like in the future, and one where you sort of demonstrate this in practice on a scenario of a war, future war with China. And I wonder if we could start more with the theoretical side of things first. And if you could explain, and I know that this is a very broad question, but if you could explain, as someone who's done a lot of work on this, which are the most important changes that you are seeing when it comes to how the character of war is changing through technology, and how will it influence the way that wars in the near future will be fought?
Yeah, I think there's a few very important trends that we're seeing evolve almost in front of our eyes. One is what I call this signature battle. That is the battle of signatures, and that's being really hastened along by the meshing of civil and military sensors on the battlefield and in strategic spaces. What used to be known as open source intelligence, has a really important role meshed with military intelligence and information from other government sources. But overlaid that is a range of government and commercial analytical capabilities, some of them driven by AI, some by big data analytics, that is very much changing how we see the battle space. And it's changing how much time we have to make decisions. It's a really important trend, probably one of the more profound, I think. So this new era meshing of information from military and other sources has been accelerated in the last couple of years, and I think it will continue to do so. A second important trend is what I'm calling the democratization of digital command and control systems. Until recently, these were the preserve of commanders at brigade or battle group or maybe combat team level. But what we've seen in the last couple of years is we've pushed down access to digital command and control systems, the ability to input relevant battlefield information and pull down relevant battlefield information, as well as calls for fire, logistics, statistics, those kind of things, to the individual through systems like Delta in Ukraine and other systems. This is changing the amount of information that people in the battle space have, notwithstanding the risk of information overload, that's always there. But it's enabling people at more junior levels to see what's going on, to appreciate the context of their actions, and implement mission command in a different way than what we have previously. Another trend, there's a bunch of others, but I think these are the top 3, and I call them a transformative trinity, is the third one is ubiquitous uncrewed systems. Now, for much of the last 80 years or so, and this did begin in the Second World War, this has been aerial vehicles. It really started with the Germans and the Americans doing trials with remote-controlled aircraft in the Second World War, all the way through Vietnam War and Iraq Wars. but we've seen a Cambrian explosion of uncrewed systems since the Russian large-scale invasion of Ukraine right on 2 years ago. And it's broadened from just the aerial domain into the maritime domain. Indeed, the Ukrainians probably lead the world in the development of a broad range of uncrewed maritime strike systems that have proven very successful in targeting Russian naval vessels. And, they've evolved their tactics and these kind of things. So, I think they're the big three things that are changing: battle space as well as strategic operations. There's a range of other ones, but for me, it's about the signature battle, democratized digital command and control, and ubiquitous autonomy as a very significant transformative trinity.
I think it's good that you've mentioned Ukraine, because after all, it is probably the biggest war of our time so far. And we have definitely seen the ubiquitous unmanned systems, as you've mentioned. And I think everyone can sort of imagine that, whether it's the maritime drones that are sinking Russian ships or the first-person drones that are taking out Russian tanks. But I wonder if the two first changes that you've mentioned, if we're seeing them in Ukraine as well. And maybe if you could give some specific examples so that someone who is not that familiar with military matters can get an idea of what that would look like in practice.
Yeah, so one of the most widespread manifestation of this mesh sensor network is the closing of the time between when a target is detected and when it's destroyed. It's been brought down to a couple of minutes now. That was not the case at the beginning of the war. But you're also seeing frontline units using civilian intelligence reports. I mean, you talk to Ukrainian soldiers, some of them use intelligence reports from inside the system as well as the daily reports from the Institute for the Study of War. So that's how we see that as well. I think another manifestation was the problems that both sides are now having in massing troops and creating meaningful tactical or operational breakthroughs on the battlefield. I think the Ukrainian counteroffensive was an example of this, that it's just very difficult to concentrate forces without the enemy picking it up, which means it's almost impossible to generate battlefield surprise. So I think they're just three initial manifestations that we're seeing. There's probably a whole lot more that we could talk about if we had more time.
I've heard that because of these changes, exactly as you've mentioned, because you can't really get a mass of soldiers and equipment in one place for too long because they will be detected and eliminated. One of the arguments that I've heard is that because of that, the warfare as we see it in Ukraine is now massively favoring defense and it's making offensive actions extremely difficult. And I wonder whether you would agree with that, and perhaps if we're now waiting for another technological breakthrough that will once again start favoring the offense.
I mean, these things go through phases. We've seen this before, where the introduction of new technologies outpaces the organisation and doctrinal constructs of existing military institutions. We saw it during the First World War, and we've seen it in other parts of history. So this is a result of new technologies. So what's going to change the current situation is not technology. What will change the current situation is the work on different organisational constructs, and more importantly, new warfighting constructs that use people and technology differently and more creatively. It took a long time to work through the stalemate that emerged at the end of 1914 to come up with the tactics and approaches that saw the large breakthroughs that the Allies were able to make in 1918. So, I think what we're after at the moment is enhanced intellectual effort, not so much technological effort. And I've written about what I think are the big operational problems that need to be solved, not just in Ukraine, but for Western militaries more generally, if they're going to be successful in modern war. Yeah, there's a couple of problems. The first one is, how do you cross tactical or operational spaces to engage the enemy in a survivable way and then be able to break through? Another problem is, how do you break through? How do you map, break through, and then exploit when the enemy has a deep defensive zone with obstacles and mines and these kind of things? So they're just two of the problems that we're seeing at the moment. There are others. What is the best way to merge old and new technologies? I mean, we're seeing a lot of old technologies, tanks, artillery, radios, EW, merge with new technologies, data sciences, autonomous systems, and these kind of things. What we're seeing at the moment, the optimal merger of them, or just initial mergers of them?
Well, that was actually sort of my next question, because I find it extremely interesting that in Ukraine we're seeing basically First World War trench warfare, or some elements of it, Soviet tanks from the 1970s, and then homemade drones used in tens of thousands. And well, first, I would like to hear your opinion on that, and whether it seems a little bit of a paradox. And then maybe if you could elaborate on what you've mentioned, whether the mesh of these technologies of old and new is in Ukraine is being done in the most efficient way, or if we're still have a lot to learn in this arena.
Well, firstly, I'd say there's no paradox in drones and trenches coexisting. I mean, in war, we don't throw out old ideas. The idea of trench warfare predates the First World War. It predates the US Civil War. The use of trenches in warfare goes all the way back to the sapping that used to take place in the sieges of enemy forts and castles 1,000 years ago. This is a very old idea, but so is good leadership. And we're not saying that is outdated. So what militaries must do is try and ensure they keep things that make them effective, that keep as many of their soldiers alive as possible, whilst also ensuring they're able to win battles. And it's this merger of old and new that is a constant battle in every military institution, in peace and war. I mean, there's a constant battle for the soul of a military institution between old and new ideas, even in peacetime. We saw this in Ukraine and Russia in the decade before this war. I mean, both Russia and Ukraine had fairly significant military transformation programs where there's a battle between old and new ideas, and that's what we're seeing on the battlefield. The difference between peace and war is, if you get it wrong in the peace, you waste money. If you get it wrong in war, you waste lives. And that's what we're seeing in Ukraine at the moment, is we're struggling with how to resolve some of the challenges we have and how to mix new and old technologies with new ideas. We're not there yet, but 2024 must be a year where we mobilise our intellectual effort in Ukraine and NATO to solve some of these fairly significant problems.
How well, to also look at the Russians, how well do you think that the Russian side is working with adapting and innovating to new technologies and responding to new elements that are appearing on the warfare? Because we do have this idea that they're very incompetent, unable to adapt, but at the same time, we have seen cases when suddenly they were able to start. As Ukrainians have started using drones, suddenly Russians started to use drones in the same way, and we were taken by surprise by that and by Russian capacity to respond. But I'd love to see, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, if the Russians were as stupid as a lot of people say, they would have lost by now. the Russians are adapting. Now, in some cases, they're adapting much slower than Ukrainian battlefield forces. There's a few different reasons for that. I mean, there's a very clear difference in the tactical cultures of the Ukrainians and the Russians. Ukrainians are more innovative and they can make changes more quickly, whereas the Russians have a more centralized command and are less keen to report failure. That said, they still have learned and been, I wouldn't say fast followers, but followers of Ukrainian innovation. And, we've seen the Russians innovate in the quantity and types of drones and loitering munitions. Some of the counters to those systems, be they cope cages or, the very wide distribution of electronic warfare systems, both vehicle-based and personnel-based at the moment. But I think where Russia probably has done best is at the strategic level. So, tactical adaptation is about winning battles. Strategic adaptation is about winning wars. And I think you've seen the Russians adapt their strategic personnel construct. They did that back in 2022 with mobilization. They adapted their defense industry. They also did that at the same time. It's just the Western media didn't pay enough attention, even though it was in the same partial mobilization directive. They have adapted their sources of supply to ensure they have a fire superiority over Ukraine at the 2-year mark of this war. And they've continued to adapt their misinformation and strategic influence campaigns, which I think has had a very significant impact on certain members of the US Congress, to the distress of many of us in the West and the greater distress of the Ukrainian government and soldiers on the front line. So the Russians are not as stupid as we'd like them to be. They have adapted, they have evolved, and the Russian army of 2024 is not the same Russian army that existed in 2022. In most of long wars like this, the army you start with is not the army you win with.
I agree with that completely, and I think that the level of success of the Russian information war on the U.S. Congress is unprecedented. But moving from that, I wonder, another assumption that we've had, I think, before this war was that technology and superior technology will sort of eliminate the advantage of quantity, of mass. And I think that what Russians are showing is that it still applies, that, quantity has a quality of its own. And I wonder if you would agree with that assumption.
No, absolutely. I mean, when my book War Transformed came out, 9 days before the Russian large-scale invasion, one of the trends I had in there was that mass is back. It may not be exactly the same as the mass that we saw in our grandfather's day in the Second World War, but mass still matters. It has some old elements, whether it's mass fires, mass personnel mobilization, mass use of armor, as well as some new elements, mass use of cheap, low-cost autonomous systems and missiles, mass use of strategic influence operations. So mass is very important, and it's not an either-or kind of thing. You need the best technology and as much of it as you can possibly have. There is no wonder weapon. I think too many people, every time a new weapon is given to Ukraine, it's seen as some form of silver bullet. There is no historical evidence that such a thing exists. It just doesn't. It is the integration of many different technologies with many different ideas and many different organizations in military institutions that are well led by well-trained and educated humans that give you the best chance of success. And trying to over-rely on one system is both intellectually lazy, but morally very perilous.
I wonder if you've read or if you know a book from Lawrence Friedman called The Future of War.
It's a terrific book, like all his books are, but it's a terrific book.
It is. Yeah. It's my favorite of all of his books. I'm going to be speaking with him in a couple of weeks on this podcast. Um, but basically, this book is a history of how humanity has been consistently failing to predict what the future of war will look like. And I wonder, as someone who works on that, how do you work with that unpredictability when you're trying to predict what the future of war will look like?
Well, that's the great thing about humans is there's absolutely no certainty about what they'll do next, even if you know someone perfectly for decades. And you know the finding in Laurie's book is that despite the huge amount of work, particularly done before World War One, there was something like 400 fictional works. The vast majority were unable to predict a lot of what happened. Now, some works did. Bernardi from Prussia did, predict air fleets, which didn't really happen in World War One, but certainly happened in World War Two. I mean, H.G. Wells's book, The War of the Worlds, predicted large-scale use of chemical and biological weapons, as well as mass mobilization of populations and industry. But by and large, as Laurie finds in his book, we haven't had a great record. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't at least try. You've got to make some informed bets, particularly in long periods of peace where the next adversary may not be very clear. One of the few luxuries the West has at the moment is we know exactly who our adversary is and is likely to be. There's four of them, what I call the authoritarian quad: Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And is probably a 99% chance that the next major war will be with one of those.
I think on that note, one key area that you mentioned in War Transformed as one that will be crucial for the future is the area of information warfare and the ability to shape and influence how your adversaries act and respond, and whether they even respond at all. And that's one area where I work on in my career outside of podcasting, and so it's quite close to me. And I also see that, at least in my opinion, it's also an area where our adversaries are quite far ahead of us, of the West. And they have a lot more, in terms of capabilities and in terms of experience, they have quite an advantage. And I wonder if you would agree with that. And if so, how can we fix that?
Yeah, I mean, violence and influence are two sides of the same coin when it comes to warfare. This idea that info war is something new for the 21st century is 100% wrong. People all the way back to antiquity engaged in information warfare. They just had very different tools, in the days of Alexander, the Greek city-states, the Romans engaged in information warfare. It was then using spies, whispering campaigns, misinformation, these kind of things. So it's always been part of war. What is very different in the current era is that the technologies of things like social media, big data, data sciences, high-performance computing, artificial intelligence allows us to identify target populations, develop messages, test and wargame those messages, run them out, and then assess the impact of that messaging in a way that was inconceivable, a couple of decades ago. So InfoWar is not new. The way we're doing it is new. Now, when it comes to authoritarians versus democracies, we clearly have very different ways of thinking about how we treat people and how we speak in the public domain. Authoritarians can say whatever they want, and we know from studies in places like Massachusetts Institute of Technology that falsehoods and lies spread more quickly through the internet and social media. They've done the research. They know that this happens. And the real problem we have is that democratically elected governments at least in theory, avoid telling lies. They try and tell the truth to a range of audiences. And as Tom Rid says in his most recent book, which is a great case study of Russian misinformation over the last century, there's a line in there where he says, misinformation and democracy can't coexist. And it's a really important idea. It's like, how do we keep up in the information space with those who can say what they want to who they want when they want? And I think one of the most important things we can do is bring transparency to what we're doing and to what they're doing. So some of it is in messaging, but a lot of it is in shining a light on all aspects of friendly and enemy behaviour, so people can make an informed judgment about what they're saying and what they're saying is going on, whether it's true or not.
I agree. I would also say that the advantage of democracies versus autocracies is that generally you don't need to lie because the reality is on, and the facts are usually on your side.
The fact generally they are. But the superpower of democracies is that we can, at least theoretically, listen to all voices and all ideas from all elements of society, which is something that Putin or President Xi can never allow in their societies. They cannot allow that and have their regimes survive. So, democracies just need to rediscover this superpower of the diversity of ideas that exists within, and really invest and leverage in all the different ideas that are inherent in democratic systems. There are many things that prevent that at the moment, and I think we need to look at the obstacles to discovering and using lots and lots of different kinds of voices.
I agree. I think we still have a lot to do in this domain. But I think talking about what we still need to do, I wonder, when you look at how Western militaries operate today, and you look at the changes that are going on and that you've described and what wars will look like in the future, how do you think that our militaries need to change to be able to succeed in this new environment? And I guess right now, I don't mean necessarily just in terms of developing and using that technology, but also in terms of mindset and ways of thinking, because militaries can often be, from definition, sort of rigid and bureaucratic structures. And I think what you're describing is a future where ability to act quickly and adapt and innovate and the speed and swiftness will be the new superpower.
I mean, speed matters sometimes. What's more important is to be able to govern tempo, because sometimes you might want to slow things down. So being able to govern tempo rather than just do everything quickly, I think is more important. And you can't do everything quickly all the time. I mean, humans only have so much capacity, and we're not going to hand off everything to machines. I just don't see that happening, not in democracies, and probably not in authoritarian regimes as well. I think what democracies need to rediscover is, despite the risk adverseness and political risk adverseness in using their people in military operations, the foundation of every military organisation is people. So investing in technology is important, but investing in people, building, training, educating people, being able to learn and adapt at all levels better and more quickly than an adversary are critical strategic advantages in the 21st century. It's been vital for Ukraine. It's one of the ways they've kept ahead of Russia, is not through technology, but through how they've been able to learn and adapt through different experiences at different levels of the institution throughout this war. So if we are not placing people at the centre of all our systems, their creativity, their ability to work with each other, and their ability to learn, adapt, and improve constantly, we're probably not going to be successful.
I think one more question on Ukraine before we move to the Pacific and look at closer at China and Taiwan. I'd like to take the advantage of the fact that you're in Australia on the other side of the world and sort of maybe more detached from the European view of what's happening. Because of that, I'd love to hear your perspective on the discussions that Europeans have been having of a potential Russian attack or challenge of NATO and a potential NATO-Russia war, maybe even without the United States. And we've heard numerous warnings from military commanders and leading politicians in Europe that have been voicing very, very urgent warnings in that regard. And I wonder, how do you see that from where you're sitting, and what's your view?
Well, firstly, the war in Ukraine is the most geostrategic, consequential event in Europe since the Second World War. There is no doubt about that. Nothing since 1945 has been more consequential, not just for European security, but global security. That's because if Russia wins, one, they will threaten other neighbours. And if I was in the Baltics or Scandinavia or Poland, I'd be deeply concerned. And we don't have to intuit this. The thing with authoritarians is they love telling us what they're going to do. Putin told us what he was going to do in Ukraine. He and Medvedev and the rest of those criminals have been telling Europeans what they're going to do to the Baltics, to Finland, to Sweden, to Norway, to Poland, and a range of other countries. So we don't have to guess at their future intentions. And President Xi of China is doing exactly the same with Taiwan and other countries. So the reason why Ukraine is consequential is not just because we want the Ukrainian people to have a free, prosperous, and sovereign country, not just because we want Europe to be stable, secure, and prosperous, because it's an engine of global growth and development, but because if Russia wins, it will embolden other authoritarians to do exactly the same. It will herald a new dark era in the 21st century where authoritarian predators will prey on their democratic neighbours. They will do this. There is absolutely no doubt about this, and it will take us decades to unroll it if we don't help Ukraine beat Russia.
I agree completely. And I guess you could say that you're already starting to see a more willingness of autocrats and dictators around the world to start breaking the international law much more than they would before the Ukraine war.
Yeah, and I think, too, the democracies are still learning to smack back just as hard. I think Europe has been very slow to understand the profound threat that it faces with Russia. And I think the way I would term it is they are very late to understanding the threat, but it's not too late. It's not too late for them to step up defence production, expand the size and capability of their military, and most importantly, flood support into Ukraine to help them not just defend themselves, but to beat Russia.
I think moving to China and the Indo-Pacific, I had a chance, I'd like to connect the two, and a couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to talk on this podcast with Richard Chirev, who was kind enough to make this connection. And there are certain similarities between the two of you, because you're both former generals who wrote books on future potential conflicts.
Noting he was a far more senior general with much more consequential British and NATO commands under his belt than I.
Noted, but still a general. But I think that in his case, he voiced a concern, or rather a very urgent warning, at a time when most people still didn't take the Russian threat seriously. And he painted a picture that today looks very mainstream, but at the time when his book came out, it was a scenario that no one could really imagine, and that seemed extremely far-fetched.
No, I actually read his book when it first came out. I picked it up and read it and really enjoyed it. I went, boy, this is kind of Sir John Hackett of the 21st century, and prescient. Now, the scenario he paints, um, a fight in the Baltic with a British aircraft carrier and these kind of things is slightly different. But in the broad, I think he gets the shifts in the strategic environment right, particularly with Russia's views of itself as a regional Northern Hemisphere hegemon. And I think if people pay attention to them and read between the lines of what he's trying to say, we might well have been better prepared for what's happened in the last couple of years.
I also read it when it came out, and I remember that I was thinking that even someone from the Czech Republic that's has a lot of experience with Russian aggression, I was thinking that that's a little far-fetched and that wouldn't really happen. And today, the Baltic countries are building defense lines on their border with Russia. But I wonder if you, having written The White Sun War, which is a fictional depiction of a future war over Taiwan between the US and China and US allies, I wonder if you see a parallel between the two books and between you and Richard, and if you think that perhaps we are in a similar situation with China as we were with Russia, as you've mentioned that both the dictators are clearly talking about what they would like to do, or if you think that when it comes to China, the US and their allies are much better prepared for what might happen.
No, I think there's close parallels in what we're trying to do is identifying a potential and likely future threat. And both books are kind of a cry to military and government institutions to invest now to deter the kind of things that happen in the book. Now, ultimately, both Richard and I, I'm pretty sure, would believe that, you'd rather not fight. If you can deter it, that's always better. The old stitch in time saves nine. And if through reading these books, policymakers might think that, wow, if we invest a little bit more in the military, it will prevent us having to spend an order of magnitude more in fighting them at some point in the future.
Do you think that at this point, deterring China is working? I guess what I'm asking is, how do you assess the willingness of China to invade at this point?
China would rather incorporate Taiwan into the People's Republic without an invasion. Clearly, it would rather win without fighting, to put it in their words. The most recent Taiwan white paper is very clear about that. But at the same time, it does not take that off the table. It is a live option that is on the table that Xi has told them to be prepared with. And they've gone through a range of different transformations in command and control, in force structures, in technologies, and these kind of things. Now, in the Western Pacific, you have a mesh of different deterrence frameworks, from the Japanese and their evolving and expanding military capacity and their new counter-strike capability, all the way down to Australia, which is way too slowly investing in its deterrent capability. The Americans are coordinating the strategic response, clearly. They have done a lot, but clearly successive commanders of Indo-PACOM based in Hawaii would like to have done more, but they just haven't seen the funding for some of their Indo-PAC strategies from Congress that they would like to have had. They haven't seen the speed of shipbuilding that they would like to have seen. They haven't seen the deployment of long-range missiles and long-range bombers at the pace they would like to see. But these things are happening. The key will be, can we do it quick enough to deter the Chinese from making a catastrophic mistake? Because that is what it would be. It would be a catastrophic mistake for them, for the Taiwanese people, and for many others throughout the Western Pacific.
I think if we look at the scenario itself of a possible war, one key difference that would differentiate this war from any other that we have seen since 1945, it's that it would be what's called a near peer or a peer conflict between two military superpowers. And I wonder if you can explain how would that make it different from all the other wars that we have seen in the recent decades?
Well, it would be very similar to what we saw in the Second World War with some obvious differences. Clearly, we've never had a major war between two nuclear powers. We haven't seen that before. We've seen proxy wars between them. Might have been Vietnam or Korea and these kind of things. And since August 1945, we haven't recrossed that Rubicon. And I think everyone would like to hope that we never have to recross that Rubicon in the use of nuclear weapons. So that is a significant strategic unknown in that kind of conflict. I think too, you are seeing, you'll see the same kind of trends play out that we're seeing in Ukraine, the need for ongoing sustained mobilization of people and industry in both countries. No matter how big they are, magazine depth is always a thing, and you would have to expand production capacity just because of the huge expenditure of precision munitions and other weapons in modern warfare. But I also think you'd see adaptation from both sides from day one. The rule about the army you start with is not the army you win with would be exactly the same in a large conflict between the PLA and the US military. Both of them would evolve and change based on the interactions between them, based on the fighting, the battles, the campaigns they undertake. Finally, I think it would be very difficult to imagine it being just restricted to Taiwan and its region. I think you would see a horizontal escalation throughout Southeast Asia, into Japan, into other countries, very quickly, within weeks or months of some kind of war over Taiwan. It's hard to imagine that not occurring because they're both large, capable actors that are able to generate multiple campaigns across a region concurrently. So, all these things give it some continuity with previous wars and some elements that are a little bit different.
And when you talk about expansion beyond Taiwan, do you mean just in terms of China bombing military bases in Japan, or do you mean that China would perhaps try to gain control of other territories apart from just Taiwan to gain some kind of strategic advantage?
That could occur, but I'd also see strategic interdiction at maritime choke points. I would imagine US and its allies destroying all Chinese shipping wherever it is within a few thousand miles of the Chinese coastline. I think that would be a part of a logical campaign. Who knows what India might do? I think there are a few potential scenarios you could imagine on a scale of probability, of course, that we could see. I mean, we could see China conducting operations in the South Pacific to distract Australia and the United States. So the thing with wars is they get out of control pretty quickly. Emotions get up, and there is no certainty in the trajectory of any war, particularly one that's so large between two nations that would have so much at stake in what would not just be a military battle, but a massive clash of ideologies.
I have a number of questions, so I'm thinking about which one should I ask first. But I want to dig into the technology side of things, because you put quite a lot of emphasis on that in your book, White Sun War, and I've really enjoyed it. And you really you describe very well what would that futuristic war look like. And to me, it seemed that even though the war is set in the book, the war is set in 2028, so just 4 years from now, the way that it's described seems to me quite futuristic and seems quite far from where I would think we are today. And I wonder if you think how realistic it is that by 2028 we could really see a war being fought like that. I think, to give a particular example, a key element that you describe in the book that could happen are unmanned autonomous ground vehicles that are basically replacing infantry and are able to, so basically robots that are able to autonomously carry out attacks and eliminate soldiers and vehicles. And that, to me, still seems like something that I would expect to see maybe in the next decade. But I wonder how close we are to that in reality.
I think we'd be very close. I mean, it might be 4 years away, but both the Chinese and the Americans have done large-scale experimentation and are rolling out ground-based autonomous systems, lethal and non-lethal. And, I think in this kind of fight, you would see fairly significant human casualties. There would be a huge imperative to, wherever possible, put robots there instead of humans. So I think, given the state of the art at the moment, a few years more development, I made some assumptions about battery life and these kind of things, but also the battlefield imperative to replace humans with machines. I think this is very possible. Remember during World War II, we went from biplanes to jet planes. Wars tend to have a driving force. There's an existential nature that allows things to happen at speeds that were previously unimaginable. And I think a war between the US and China would see both sides adapting at speeds that would probably be historically unprecedented.
Another element in the book that I thought was really interesting was the idea that both sides bring out a lot of classified technology, highly classified technology that was previously unknown to even exist. And we've actually seen that in previous wars. We've seen it in Gulf War, for example, when the US brought out stuff that no one knew really existed before. And I wonder, how likely do you think that we'll see that in a potential war over Taiwan, and how much of an influence these secret weapons that we can really imagine today might have? Thank you for listening to this conversation. If you'd like to hear the rest of it, you can find it on my Patreon. Click the link in the description or go to patreon.com/decodinggeopolitics. And if you decide to become a supporter, you get bonus content, Patreon-only episodes, and you will be able to ask questions to my future guests. And here's what you can see in the bonus part.
I think the Americans have proven before that when they go to war, a whole lot of things become possible that were unimaginable a couple of years beforehand.
What are, in your opinion, the most applicable and important lessons from Ukraine for a war in China?
Australia would side with Taiwan and the United States and Japan because it would be in our interest to do so. It is not in our interest for a large authoritarian predator to take over another democracy.